everyone, welcome to Relationship Refresh. This is week 1. My name is Ben Johnson. I'm privileged to be one of the pastors at Gloria Lutheran Church in Urbandale, Iowa. And the whole kind of point behind Relationship Refresh was as we move into the fall and as we are facing a lot of new things with the social distancing, the pandemic, everything happening with schools and work and family and relationships, one of the areas that can take a real toll is on our relationship. Now, I'm not only speaking in terms of the marriage relationship, but I would say that would be more predominantly what we will be speaking to. So if I use that term of spouse or thinking in those terms, just know I am speaking of the overall relationships wherever you may be at in your life. But that's really kind of the focus as we look at what does it mean to refresh our relationships. Now, the two aspects that make up a really healthy relationship is the ability to communicate and the ability to work through conflict. I still hear it from time to time when you ask people, how's your relationship going, or what are things that are going on? They're like, we're good, we're fine. We have no conflict, or things are great. Man, that adage of that's what makes for a healthy relationship is just not true. Every relationship has conflict. In fact, it needs conflict. How do you grow a muscle? You conflict it. In a healthy way, you add conflict. So it's not the absence of conflict that makes for a healthy relationship. In fact, though, it's the presence of conflict, but working through it in a healthy way through good communication, right? Now, I am speaking also to the reality that the ultimate best relationship is a foundation on the one who designed marriage in the first place, and that's Jesus himself. And so as we work through this, I'm absolutely coming to you from a worldview that says Jesus is real, his power is real, and his love for you and his ability to work in all relationships is very real. So that's definitely the angle that I'm going to be speaking into this. Now, each week we're going to hit some different topics, some different themes, and then be able to give you guys some exercises that are always going to be on our website that you can download those, and it'll be important to download those and print those off. If you didn't see them for week 1, go back, kind of check that out, and make sure you get those handouts because those are going to be really important as exercises to put the things we learn into practice, all right? Now, for week 1, what we're going to be talking about is the communication gap. Communication gap. Now, I'm going to be using the whiteboard here to kind of put up 2 different quadrants. The first one here, in this first square, we're going to put all of our expectations. Now, what are other words we could use for our expectations? How would you define that? You could use words like our hopes, our dreams. This is where if you had ultimate control over the world, over your destiny, you would say, this is how you want it to play out. Those are our expectations. And we are constantly working through our expectations. We have expectations of everything, to how we want our coffee made, how we want our commute to go to work, how we want our children to behave, how we want our job to treat us, how we want. Constantly, we are working in our expectations. Now, in the second box, though, over here, we're going to put what we're going to call our reality. If our expectations are what we hope will happen, our reality is what actually happens, right? Now, we bring this up because when stuff happens in our life, when our reality happens and it's different than what we expected to happen, what that creates in the middle here is a gap. And our brains, it hates this gap. And so our brain is actually going to go into overdrive trying to pull this gap together. And there's only really 2 ways that our brain is going to close this gap, and it's going to insert either positive things or negative things. This is when you've heard the phrase, when you give the benefit of the doubt, right? That what happened in reality actually caused our brain doubt. We're like, I don't get why that would happen. It doesn't make sense. So there's a gap. But our brain is going to insert positive things, meaning I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to close that in, meaning I'm going to add positive things into the gap that was created. But the more gap that happens in any relationship, the higher the probability that you're going to get in some conflict and some fights, because eventually you got to start inserting negative things, right? Like, for instance, let's say you try to show up to a particular meeting and the person hosting the meeting was late. The first time you'll probably give benefit of the doubt. Maybe they lost track of time, or, it's okay, maybe their car, they had something else going on or whatever. And you feel kind of positive. But then if it happens a second time or a third time or a fourth time, now all of a sudden things are going to change, and you're going to start putting things in like, maybe it's not important to them. Maybe this is a character flaw in that person. Maybe, whatever. But our brains are going to go into overdrive to pull these things together. Now, I would wager a bet that in your life, most of the conflict you face, like times when you feel frustrated, times when you feel disappointed, the times when you feel angry, the times where you feel hurt, are probably revolving around some element of gap, of when reality is not meeting our expectations in that moment. A great example of communication gap, and the gap actually happens in Mark 4, chapter 35 to 41. And this is the story of Jesus calming the storm. Fantastic section that's looking at this gap in process. I'm going to read this for you. And it says, on that day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, let's go across to the other side of the lake. Leaving the crowd, they took with him in his boat, just as he was, and the other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so the boat was already filling. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him, being his disciples, and said to him, Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing, or we're about to drown? And Jesus awoke, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Man, what a wonderful little story that is. But you can see the gap in action, right? That their expectation was they were going to get in this boat and what? They were going to sail to the other side of the lake. This was a good time to sail. Usually not many storms would happen at this time, but halfway through it, or as they're heading across the lake, it says this great storm just rolled in. Now, these would have been very dangerous on the lake, that many people lost their lives due to these really quick storms that would come onto the lake. So they're very afraid. And all of them are in this state of, what are we going to do? How are we going to get through this? And except for Jesus. Jesus is in the stern of the boat asleep. Now, Jesus, even though he's sleeping, he's communicating to the disciples. Now, how did they process that communication? Well, their expectation of Jesus is very different than the reality he gave them. That in reality, Jesus is here sleeping while they are worried about their own lives. And so how are they filling in that gap? Jesus, don't you care that we're about to die? Jesus, don't you care? I mean, you can see the negative thing that they are putting in there. The way that their brain connected the two was to say, well, obviously Jesus doesn't care. Otherwise, what? He would be with us. He'd be helping. He'd be worried. He would be in our corner. He'd be helping us figure this out. But obviously Jesus doesn't care. I mean, how often have we faced that in our own life? Something going on at home, something stressful, and your spouse is on the couch taking a nap, and you're like, well, obviously they don't care. Or you put a lot of energy into doing something outside or making a dinner or setting something up at home, and your spouse comes home and they don't compliment the way you would want, or they don't react the way you would want, or they don't come to help when you need help, or whatever it might be. And you're like, well, obviously they don't care. See, the reality is the more gap we have in our life, the more stress we're going to have, the more frustrations we're going to have, and the more disconnection we're going to feel with our partner. Again, gap is when our expectations of how we thought something should go does not connect with, in reality, of how things actually went. As you look at what we are facing as we are all moving into the fall right now, you realize all of us are facing a tremendous amount of gap in our lives. We have expectations of how things were going to go with work, with school, with vacations, with sports, with the economy, with our church, with what we consider our sense of normal. And if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that how little control we really have over reality. So if we look at this drawing, and all what we're working with is our expectations and our reality, but we don't have control over our reality, really. I mean, there's parts of our reality we definitely have control over, but not all of it. But what do we have control over? We definitely have control over our expectations. We have control over how well we communicate our expectations. It's so important in your relationship to pull back the layers and discover what are your expectations. And most important, how do you feel your expectations if they're not being met? Why are they not being met? See, many times we just get the byproduct. We just feel frustrated, or we feel anxious, or we feel angry. We feel the byproduct, but it takes work to get to, why do you feel the way you feel? What expectation is not being properly met by your reality? And so it's so important in your relationship to take time to do this. There has to be time in your relationship where each of you are putting down your phones, turning off the TV, coming together, put the kids to bed or get a babysitter, and talk and communicate and work through what those expectations are and really connect with one another. The second really important thing as you work through this is to remember that sometimes once we uncover what those expectations are, there's going to be times where we need to really adjust the expectations. It might be an expectation that is just not going to be able to be met. And you're just going to have to face that we're in a new reality. We're in a new thing. And you're going to have to think through, how do we make this work for our relationship? Now, there are 2 exercises that were posted online that are going to be really important to download and have. The first one is called the communication exercise. And this is a really wonderful thing. You're going to need 2 of them, one for each person in your relationship. And what you're going to do is you're going to work through these different questions. And what this is going to do is really help uncover and pull back the different layers of your expectations in your life, particularly as it pertains to your relationship and how you deal with your partner. For instance, right on the first page, it says, in our relationship, I would like from you, fill it in. There's 5 blanks. When I do marriage and pre-marriage counseling, I always say minimum 3, max 5, right? Think it through, and no one-word answers. Like, what do I want from you? Like, encouragement, love, and no, like go deeper. Like, what do you really expect? What do you want? What do you hope for from your partner? It says on the top of the page, and it's such a good summation, it says, often there are problems in relationships because what is expected of each partner is not clear. Having expectations and not communicating them to our partner almost always results in misunderstandings and disappointment. Right? I mean, that's how it goes. And so you want to flesh that out, that in your relationship, what are the expectations you have of your partner? And then, the second one says, I've assumed you knew this, but in case you don't know, I want to tell you. And there's just different blanks that are going to work through some different things throughout this whole thing. And so the goal is you fill this thing out, you put some energy into it, and then you find some really solid time to come together as a couple and talk through this with your partner. Talk through, what are your expectations? What are these things? How's it going? Do a check-in. This is so refreshing. When I do marriage and pre-marriage counseling, over and over again, couples will say this is the exercise that really, really meant the most to them out of everything we went through. The second thing you're going to see, though, this one's a heavy hitter, okay? This is the home run. You're getting all four bases. Now, the other one is called the Daily Dialogue for Couples, and this is just a wonderful little exercise that this was actually given to my wife and I for when we did premarital counseling, and we've had it ever since. And it's wonderful for introverts. So if you're more introverted, we'll get there later. But if you're more introverted, this is a wonderful exercise. But it works through these simple questions of that you go 1 through 5, and each person goes, no skipsies, you got to answer. And so like number 1 is an appreciation you have of the other person. What do you appreciate about them? And each person goes. Number 2, what's new information in your life? Anything, whatever it might be, just new information. Number 3 is what's been on your mind recently? If your brain was a computer, what's taking up the most RAM? Know what I mean? What have you been processing on? What have you been kind of rolling on? And that's number 3, puzzles. What's been on your mind recently? Number 4 are what's a complaint you have with your partner with a specific request for change. Now nobody likes this part of it, but it's important. It's important. What's something that's going on in your marriage or in your life where you're saying, if you could, this is a complaint I have, but you got to have it thought through well enough to say, and how would you change that? How would reality meet your expectations? And you only get one thing, so you better think it through. And number 5 are what are your expectations? What are some wishes, some hopes, some dreams that you might have for the future? Now this one is called a daily dialogue for couples because the more you do it, the better connected the relationship will be. Now think of this less as me trying to convince you or model for you just what a healthy relationship, but think of more of personal training for connection in your relationship, that these are just tools that will help refresh any relationship at any time. Because again, the baseline of a healthy relationship is good communication, good vulnerable communication, where you're really sharing your thoughts and your heart and the things that are really on your mind. And the second part is to work through conflict in a way that brings the relationship together, not pulling it apart. Now, later on in the study, we'll get to what good conflict resolution looks like and forgiveness. We're going to work through those things. But in this first section, we're gonna really settle here, okay? And so as a couple, my advice would be to take these different resources, create some quiet time. And for some of you, that's going to be the hardest part. With everything happening at home, it's going to be important to try to work this in with your spouse and to find some quiet time and really work this thing out and connect. Now, in our next time together, we're going to be working through finding value in our differences and really focusing on the difference between introversion and extroversion. And please know this, if you ever need anything, if something comes up through these studies, you have questions, you have thoughts, maybe you have concerns, whatever it might be, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You're going to see my email address come up, but it's ben.johnson@gdlc.church. Please reach out, and I will do whatever I can to help refresh your relationship. Thanks for being part of week 1, and I look forward to seeing you in week 2.